The air in Oak Creek always smelled like damp pine and wet asphalt during late July. After 4 consecutive months on an overseas deployment, that smell was usually the first thing that made me feel like I was finally back on civilian soil. As a 38-year-old master sergeant in the United States Army, I was accustomed to long periods of silence, harsh environments, and the uncomfortable weight of tactical gear. But nothing in my nearly 2 decades of military service could have prepared me for the sickening knot that formed in my stomach as I pulled my dusty sedan onto the street where I grew up. I had taken 3 weeks of emergency leave to return home. 6 months earlier, our father, Major Arthur Vance, had passed away peacefully in his sleep. Because of my deployment schedule and my younger brother Julian's constant promises that he had everything under control, we had delayed settling Dad's estate. Dad had left us a modest 2-story craftsman house, a life's worth of neatly organized tools, and one specific binding instruction in his final will. The locked oak chest beneath the floorboards of my study must not be opened until both Sarah and Julian are present together. I had spent my entire flight across the Atlantic, mentally preparing for the moment Julian and I would sit down in Dad's study, turn the key in that old iron lock, and finally face whatever memories our father had spent his entire life keeping hidden. Instead, as I rounded the corner onto Elm Street, my headlights caught the bright neon glow of poster boards taped to wooden stakes along the curb. Estate clearance. Everything must go. 1 day only. Crazy bargains. My heart plummeted into my throat. I slammed on the brakes, pulling up to the curb behind a line of unfamiliar pickup trucks and hatchbacks. Strangers were milling across our father's front lawn. Total strangers were sitting on Dad's prized porch chairs, rifling through cardboard boxes filled with my mother's vintage kitchenware, and haggling over rusty lawnmowers. Standing behind a white plastic folding table right in the middle of the driveway was my 34-year-old brother, Julian. He was wearing an unbuttoned flannel shirt, aviator sunglasses, and a wide, triumphant smirk as he gestured toward the tables like a carnival barker. In his right hand, he held a thick roll of crumpled $20 bills. I opened my car door and stepped out into the humid air, my boots crunching heavily on the gravel driveway. "Julian!" I called out, my voice sharp with a mix of disbelief and authority. What the hell is going on here? Julian didn't even turn his head right away. He was too busy talking to a heavy-set man in a worn leather motorcycle jacket who was leaning over the table. "Look, man," Julian was saying, his voice dripping with casual indifference. "I'm clearing out the whole house today. Whatever's on the table, just make me an offer and take it off my hands. I don't care." I pushed my way through 2 neighbors who were inspecting a box of Dad's old carpentry manuals. As I reached the front of the table, my eyes scanned the items laid out across the faded plastic table runner. My blood ran cold. Sitting right near the edge of the table was a dark mahogany shadow box, lined with faded navy velvet. The glass cover was smudged with fingerprints, but the items inside were instantly recognizable. Inside that box sat our father's highest military decorations, his commendation medals, his Bronze Star, his Silver Star, and the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military award for valor that a soldier can receive. Slapped directly across the glass face of the velvet case was a round, neon orange sticker with handwritten black ink. $15 or best offer. "Julian, stop!" I yelled, reaching across the table to grab the box. "Are you out of your mind?" Before my fingers could touch the wood, the man in the leather jacket reached down, slapped a crumpled $20 bill onto the table in front of Julian, and snatched the velvet box by its brass latch. "Sold," Julian said with a quick nod, scooping up the 20 without missing a beat. "Keep the change, pal." "Hey, put that down," I shouted, turning toward the man as he clutched the case against his chest. "That is not for sale. That belonged to my father. Put it back right now." The man paused, looking startled by the sheer intensity in my voice and the military posture I instinctively took. But Julian stepped around the table, placing himself directly between me and the buyer. "Ignore her," Julian said coolly to the man. "She's just being dramatic. Deal's done. You paid for it. It's yours. Get going before she makes a scene." The man looked back and forth between us, shrugged, turned on his heel, and walked briskly down the driveway toward a dark gray Ford F-150 parked across the street. "Julian, no." I lunged forward to chase after him, but Julian grabbed my upper arm, pulling me back with all his weight. "Leave it alone, Sarah," Julian spat, his voice dropping into a harsh, bitter hiss. "It's $15. The deal is closed. Let go of me." I shoved his hands off me with a swift, defensive motion, but by the time I took 3 rapid strides down the driveway, the dark pickup truck had already cranked its engine. Tires squealed against the asphalt, and the truck sped away down Elm Street, disappearing around the bend toward the highway before I could even read the license plate. I stood in the middle of the driveway, the humid summer wind whipping against my face, chest heaving, staring at the empty space where my father's memory had just been driven away for a single $20 bill. The sibling rift. I turned back to face my brother. The crowd of yard sale shoppers had gone silent, watching the two of us stand in the driveway like spectators at a street fight. Julian was trying to play it cool, smoothing down his shirt and tucking the money into his front pocket, but his jaw was tight, and he refused to look me in the eye. "Inside now," I said, my voice dangerously low. Julian rolled his eyes, but he followed me through the front screen door into the house. The interior of our childhood home looked like it had been raided. Half of the living room furniture was missing. Yellow tape was stuck to the walls where framed family photos used to hang, and empty cardboard boxes littered the hardwood hallway. "What did you do, Julian?" I asked, turning to face him in the middle of the empty living room. "Dad's been gone 6 months. I explicitly told you to wait until I got back from deployment so we could handle the house together. And you put his life on a yard sale table?" "I couldn't wait, Sarah," Julian snapped back, finally dropping his relaxed facade and stepping up into my space. "You live in a military bubble, where everything is neat and organized and paid for by Uncle Sam. You have no idea what reality is like out here. I've been drowning in mortgage notices. The bank was threatening a lien on this house by the end of the month. I had to generate cash immediately, and I don't have time to mourn a ghost who never gave a damn about us anyway." "Never gave a damn about us?" I felt a surge of anger so violent my hands began to shake. Dad spent 40 years working himself to the bone to make sure you had a roof over your head and a college fund that you blew in 2 semesters. Dad was a stranger who lived in the same house as us. Julian yelled back, his cheeks flushing red. "He sat in that study for hours staring at the wall. He never came to my baseball games. He never said I'm proud of you. All he cared about was his stupid rules, his stupid discipline, and those stupid pieces of brass locked in his floorboards. He valued his dead war memories more than he ever valued his own living children." "That isn't true, Julian." "It is true!" Julian shouted, slapping his thigh in frustration. "He kept those medals locked up like they were holy relics. He wouldn't even let us touch the box." "Well, guess what? They aren't holy relics. They're zinc and ribbon, Sarah. They're metal. And some guy just gave me $20 for them, which is $20 more than Dad ever gave me when I actually needed help." I took a deep, steadying breath, fighting down the impulse to scream. I forced myself to retreat into my officer training. Stay calm, analyze the tactical situation, identify the objective. The objective right now was simple: get those medals back. "Who was that man, Julian?" I asked, keeping my voice flat and even. "Who bought the shadow box?" Julian crossed his arms and looked out the window toward the yard. "I don't know. Don't lie to me," I said, stepping closer. "You talked to him before I walked up. You knew him. Give me his name or his phone number." "I said I don't know," Julian sneered, turning his back on me. "He was just a walk-up buyer, some guy driving by who likes collecting military junk. I didn't ask for his life story, and I didn't get his receipt. The medals are gone, Sarah. Get over it." "Julian, you don't understand what you just sold," I said, my voice trembling with an underlying dread. "Dad told me about those medals once. When I was 16, I saw him cleaning them in his study. I asked him why he kept them locked away instead of hanging them on the wall like other officers do. Do you know what he told me?" Julian didn't answer. He just stood by the window, staring bitterly at the lawn. "He told me that the medals were custom engraved," I continued, watching my brother's reaction closely. "He told me he had a jeweler in Germany engrave something on the back of his silver star and his Distinguished Service Cross right after he earned them. He said it was a secret he was holding on to until the day both of his children were mature enough to understand it. Did you even look at the back of them before you put a $15 price tag on them?" Julian turned around slowly. For a fraction of a second, I saw a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, a brief shadow of doubt. But then his mouth hardened into a tight, cynical line. "He was pulling your leg, Sarah," Julian muttered, dismissively waving his hand. Dad loved playing the tortured hero. It was all a dramatic act to keep us feeling guilty. There was nothing on the back of those medals except standard military serial numbers. I looked at them. They're just cheap pieces of metal. He was lying. I could see it in the slight twitch of his jaw and the quickness of his answer. He hadn't checked. He had seen a box of old items, seen an opportunity to make a quick buck and hurt our father's memory at the same time, and he had handed it over without a second thought. "I am going to find that truck," I said softly, looking my brother dead in the eye. "And when I find out what was written on those medals, you are going to sit down and listen to every single word." The hunt for the shadow box. I didn't waste another minute arguing with Julian. I walked out of the house, leaving him to manage his yard sale alone, and began executing a systematic search of the neighborhood. Oak Creek was a small town, but it sat near a major interstate junction. If that pickup truck hit the highway, tracking it down would be nearly impossible without law enforcement assistance. But something about the buyer bothered me, the way he had walked directly up to the table, the way he had immediately located the shadow box, and the way Julian had nodded to him before any words were exchanged. This hadn't been a random walk-up. It was a planned pickup. I walked across the street to Mrs. Gable's house. Mrs. Gable was an 82-year-old widow who had lived opposite our family for 4 decades. She spent most of her days sitting near her front bay window, watching the street, and she had recently installed a modern high-definition Ring security camera above her garage to monitor her driveway. When I knocked on her door, Mrs. Gable embraced me warmly, expressing her condolences for Dad's passing. When I explained the situation, that a key historical item belonging to Major Vance had been removed without authorization, her face hardened with protective indignation. "Arthur Vance was a good man," Mrs. Gable said firmly, pulling up her tablet application on her kitchen table. "He cleared my driveway every single winter after my Herald passed. Let's see what this camera caught." We scrubbed back through the video footage from the last 2 hours. At 10:14 a.m., the dark gray Ford F-150 pulled onto Elm Street. The video showed the truck pulling up to the curb directly opposite our driveway. The driver got out, a man in his late 50s, wearing a brown leather jacket and a dark baseball cap. As I zoomed in on the high-definition frame, I caught 2 vital details. First, on the rear bumper of the truck was a metallic emblem featuring a stylized crossed rifles logo surrounded by the words, "Vance & Sons, Antiques and Militaria." Second, the front license plate was clearly visible under the summer sunlight, K792LPR. "Vance & Sons?" I muttered aloud. "No relation to us." "Wait a minute," Mrs. Gable said, squinting at the screen. "I know that store. That's Marcus Vance's shop over in Blackwood. He's an old military collector. He runs a pawn and antique business about 20 miles south near the old armory." My phone buzzed in my hand. It was a text message from a buddy of mine at the local sheriff's department, whom I had asked to run a quick check if I found a plate. I replied with the license plate number immediately, and within 3 minutes, he confirmed my suspicion. The truck was registered to Marcus Vance, owner of Blackwood Militaria and Antiquities. I thanked Mrs. Gable, walked back across the street, and intercepted Julian just as he was packing up the remaining cardboard boxes into the trunk of his car. "Get in the passenger seat," I commanded, tossing my car keys into the air and catching them. Julian looked up, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What? Why?" "We're going to Blackwood," I said. "Marcus Vance's antique shop. You know him, don't you?" Julian's face went pale. The color drained from his lips so quickly, it was as if I had hit him with a bucket of ice water. He tried to laugh it off, but his voice cracked. I don't know what you're talking about. I just watched the security footage from Mrs. Gable's house, Julian," I said, stepping into his personal space until he was backed up against his rear bumper. "Marcus Vance didn't just stumble upon our yard sale. He drove straight here, walked straight to your table, paid $20, and left with Dad's medals. You called him before I got home, didn't you? You set up a private sale." Julian stared at me for 3 long seconds. Finally, his shoulders slumped, and he let out a bitter, exhausted sigh. "Fine," Julian yelled, throwing his hands in the air. "Yes! I called him yesterday. I found his shop online last week. I sold him Dad's old military journals 3 days ago for $200 to pay off my electric bill, and he told me if I ever found Dad's war medals, he'd give me top dollar for them. I lied to him and told him our father had no other living relatives and that the family wanted the stuff gone. Happy now? A sickening realization washed over me. You sold Dad's personal journals too? They were just dust collectors sitting in his desk. Julian yelled, defensive anger flaring up again. Page after page of operational logs, troop counts, and dates from 25 years ago. Who cares? Dad's journals? I whispered, my heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. Major Arthur Vance had suffered in silence for decades, refusing to speak about his past, writing everything down in leather-bound notebooks that he kept locked away. And my brother had sold his soul, his history, and his memory to an antique dealer for pocket money. You are getting in that car right now, I said, my voice dangerously calm. We are going to Marcus Vance's shop. We are buying back the journals, and we are getting those medals back. And if you refuse to walk through that door with me, I will file a formal police report for the theft of estate property before the sun sets today. Julian looked at my face, realized I wasn't bluffing, and violently slammed his car trunk shut. Fine, he hissed. Let's go watch you waste your money. The antique shop. The drive to Blackwood was spent in suffocating silence. Julian sat in the passenger seat with his arms tightly crossed, staring out the window at the passing telephone poles, while I kept both hands locked onto the steering wheel at 10 and 2, my mind racing. I kept thinking back to our childhood. When Julian was 10 and I was 14, Dad used to take us camping in the North Woods every autumn. Dad was a master woodsman. He could build a shelter in 40 minutes, identify every plant in the forest, and cook over an open fire like a master chef. But at night, while Julian and I slept in our tent, Dad would sit outside by the dying embers of the campfire for hours, staring out into the darkness in absolute silence. Whenever I snuck out of the tent to bring him a cup of black coffee, he would smile softly, ruffle my hair, and say, "Go back to sleep, Sarah Bear. The night belongs to the ghosts. You kids just worry about the morning." I used to think he was talking about literal ghosts or standard war stories. But as I grew older and joined the infantry myself, I realized what those ghosts were. They were the names of young men who didn't get to come home, the burden of command decisions that went wrong, and the agonizing guilt of surviving when better men had fallen. When we pulled into the parking lot of Blackwood Militaria and Antiquities, the dark gray Ford F-150 was parked near the front entrance. The store was housed in an old red brick building, with barred windows and brass display cases showing historical swords, vintage uniforms, and framed military maps. I turned off the engine, looked over at Julian, and said, "Not a word out of you unless I ask you a question. Understand?" Julian scoffed, but he didn't protest as he opened his door and followed me inside. The interior of the shop smelled of old paper, gun oil, and polished leather. Glass counters stretched across the showroom, housing hundreds of historical artifacts from World War I up through modern conflicts. Sitting behind a heavy oak desk near the back of the store was the man from the yard sale, Marcus Vance. He was wearing a dark green canvas shirt with a veteran's pin on the lapel. He was adjusting a magnification lamp over a velvet display tray when the bell above the door chimed. Marcus looked up. His eyes traveled from me, noticing my military posture, my short hair, and my authoritative stance, over to Julian, who was hanging back near the door like a nervous teenager. "Well," Marcus said, his voice deep, gravelly, and calm. "I wondered if I'd be seeing you two today." I stepped up to the counter, resting my hands flat against the glass surface. "Mr. Vance, my name is Sarah Vance. I'm a master sergeant in the U.S. Army, and Major Arthur Vance was my father. My brother here sold you our father's shadow box and his personal journals today without my consent and without legal authorization from our father's estate." Marcus slowly removed his reading glasses and set them down on the desk. He didn't look angry or surprised. Instead, a deeply solemn expression settled across his weathered face. "Master Sergeant," Marcus said respectfully, bowing his head slightly, "I recognized your father's name the moment your brother called me last week. Major Arthur Vance was a legend in the 3rd Infantry Division. His tactical maneuvers during the 1999 deployment saved dozens of men from total annihilation. Julian took a step forward, his brow furrowing. Wait, you knew my dad? Marcus turned his sharp eyes toward Julian, his expression darkening noticeably. I didn't know him personally, young man, but every career infantryman in the state knows his story, which is why I was disgusted when you called me up, offering to sell his medals like old rags. Julian flinched, shifting his weight uncomfortably. I needed the money. Shut up, Julian, I said coldly, before turning back to Marcus. Sir, I have the funds to buy back everything he sold you. Name your price for the medals and the journals, and we will take them off your hands right now. Marcus stared at me for a long moment. Then, he reached under his desk, pulled out a key set, unlocked a heavy steel safe behind his chair, and pulled out the dark mahogany velvet box. Master Sergeant, Marcus said softly, setting the velvet box gently onto the counter between us. When your brother brought this to me on your lawn today, I paid him his $20 because I knew that if I didn't take these medals, some random bargain hunter would buy them, tear them apart, and sell them on eBay for scrap value. He slid the velvet box across the glass toward me. I didn't buy these to keep them, Marcus continued, his voice heavy with emotion. I brought them here because I wanted to inspect them myself. Son, Marcus said, looking directly at Julian. You told me your father was just an arrogant officer who didn't care about his family. You told me those medals were worthless pieces of standard brass. Did you ever bother to take them out of the velvet casing? Julian swallowed hard, his throat dry. No, they were pinned to the backing. They were held in by basic brass clips, Marcus said softly. He reached out with 2 fingers, lifted the silver star from its velvet cutout, and turned it upside down under the bright light of his magnification lamp. I've been collecting and restoring military decorations for over 40 years, Master Sergeant. Standard issue medals have stamped serial numbers on the bottom rim. But your father did something I have only seen twice in my entire life. Marcus turned the silver star over completely, exposing the smooth silver reverse side of the award, and slid it toward us. Look at the back, Marcus said. What was engraved? I stepped closer to the counter, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Julian hesitantly stepped up beside me, his eyes wide as he leaned over the illuminated glass. The back of the silver star was not smooth brass. Every single millimeter of the silver surface was covered in tight, delicate, hand-engraved cursive writing, carved deep into the metal by a precision jeweler's tool. The lettering was worn smooth in places, as if human fingers had rubbed over the metal thousands of times over the course of decades. Read it aloud, Sarah, Marcus said quietly. Your brother needs to hear it. My hands trembled as I picked up the heavy silver star. The metal was cool against my skin, but as I brought it under the light, the words etched into the reverse side burned into my vision. I swallowed the lump in my throat and began to read my father's handwriting, carved into the very metal he had won in battle. To my beloved children, Sarah and Julian. This medal does not belong to me. It belongs to Corporal Thomas Miller, age 21, who threw his body over an exploding mortar round in the valley of Al-Shahab on November 14, 1999. He gave his life in the dirt so that I could survive the night, return home across the ocean, and hold the 2 of you in my arms. Every breath I take, every bedtime story I read to you, and every birthday I am permitted to see, was purchased with Thomas's blood. When you look at this medal, do not see glory. See the price of my return. Live with honor, love each other fiercely, and never forget that you were loved more than my own life. Dad. A suffocating silence descended upon the shop. The only sound was the faint ticking of an old grandfather clock near the door. I looked down at the metal, tears silently spilling over my eyelashes and dripping onto the glass counter. All those years, all those late nights where Dad sat by the campfire in absolute silence, staring into the dark, he wasn't ignoring us. He was carrying the unbearable weight of a 21-year-old boy who had died so that he could come home and raise us. Now turn over the Distinguished Service Cross, Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly as he gestured toward the second medal sitting in the box. I reached into the case and lifted the heavier, dark bronze cross. I flipped it over. On the back of the cross, another message was etched in the exact same hand-engraved script. To my son, Julian. I know I am a quiet man. I know the darkness in my mind makes it hard for me to show you the warmth you deserve. When I look at you, I see the future that Corporal Miller was robbed of. I see strength, potential, and a bright light that I pray war never touches. If I could not give you the father you wished for, know that every moment I stayed quiet was because I was praying you would never have to understand the cost of this cross. Everything I have left in this world is yours and Sarah's. Forgive me the reckoning. I heard a sudden, violent gasp beside me. I turned my head. Julian was staring at the bronze cross in my hand, his face pale as chalk, his eyes wide with an agony so profound it looked like he had been struck in the chest with a sledgehammer. "No!" Julian whispered, his voice cracking into a ragged sob. "No, no." He grabbed the edge of the glass display counter to steady himself as his knees buckled. Tears flooded down his cheeks, dropping onto his flannel shirt as he stared at our father's handwriting etched into the bronze. He wrote that for me?" Julian choked out, tears streaming down his face uncontrollably. He kept that on the back of his medal. For me? He carried those medals in his pocket every single day until he put them in that floorboard box, son, Marcus said, his voice filled with a stern, tragic weight. When I opened his journals that you sold me 3 days ago, every single entry started with the same sentence. "Lord, help me be worthy of the life Thomas gave back to my kids." Your father didn't keep those medals buried because he was ashamed or cold. He kept them buried because they were his holy sanctuary. He didn't want his war trauma to poison your childhood. Julian fell back onto a wooden bench near the counter, burying his face in his hands, his whole body shaking with heavy, shuddering sobs. "I sold it," Julian wept, his voice muffled by his palms. "I sold his sacrifice for $20. I called him a monster. I told everyone he didn't care about us. Oh God, Sarah. What did I do? What did I do?" I stood there over my brother, watching the wall of bitterness and resentment he had built around his heart for 20 years, shatter into millions of pieces. The greed, the arrogance, the desperate desire to erase our father's legacy, it all dissolved under the overwhelming, unconditional weight of what our father had actually felt for him. I set the medals down on the velvet casing, walked over to the bench, and sat down beside my brother. For the first time since we were young children, I wrapped my arm tightly around Julian's shoulders, pulling him against my side as he wept into my chest. "He loved you, Julian," I whispered into his hair, tears pouring down my own face. "He always loved you. He just didn't know how to carry the weight alone." Marcus Vance watched us in quiet silence. He walked behind his desk, picked up a brown cardboard box containing our father's leather-bound journals, and set it down next to the shadow box on the counter. "Master Sergeant," Marcus said softly. I looked up, wiping my eyes. "How much do I owe you, Mr. Vance? For everything?" Marcus looked down at the shadow box, then back at Julian, who was slowly wiping his face, staring at the medals with reverent awe. "You don't owe me a single penny," Marcus said firmly. "I don't sell sacred ground in my shop. Take your father's legacy home where it belongs, and make sure you read those journals together. Restoration and the lesson." We returned to our childhood home as the late afternoon sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across Elm Street. The yard sale was long over. The remaining folding tables sat empty on the lawn, and the neon cardboard signs lay discarded in the grass. Julian and I walked inside, carried the mahogany shadow box and the box of journals up the stairs, and entered our father's quiet study. We knelt down beside the desk, pulled back the faded rug, and lifted the loose floorboard. Together, using Dad's heavy iron key, we unlocked the wooden chest beneath the floor. Instead of keeping the medals locked away in the dark, Julian took out a polished brass frame from Dad's desk. Together, we mounted the Silver Star and the Distinguished Service Cross on a dual-sided glass display stand, a stand that allowed anyone who looked at them to clearly read both the front of the honors and the hand-engraved words of love and sacrifice on the back. We placed the glass display right in the center of the mantel above the fireplace in the living room, where the sunlight caught the silver and bronze every morning. Later that evening, as twilight settled over Oak Creek, Julian and I sat together on the front porch steps, sharing a thermos of hot coffee, just like Dad used to do. Opened across our laps was the very first volume of Major Arthur Vance's personal journal, dated November 15th, 1999. Julian ran his thumb gently across the yellowed page, reading our father's words out loud into the quiet evening air. If my children ever read these pages, I pray they understand that every battle I fought, every silence I kept, and every scar I carry, was born so that they could live in a world filled with peace. Honor is not bought with money or won in applause. Honor is the love you leave behind. Julian looked over at me, his eyes clear, his spirit finally at peace. "Thank you for not giving up on them, Sarah," he said softly. "And for not giving up on me." I smiled, resting my hand on my brother's shoulder. Dad never gave up on us. We were just learning how to read what he left behind. Greed can trick us into looking at priceless sacrifices and seeing only cheap items to be traded away. But true honor, the kind bought with love, duty, and quiet devotion, can never be priced, sold, or forgotten. It waits silently for those who are willing to turn it over and look at the truth beneath the surface. If this story touched your heart or reminded you of the quiet, unseen sacrifices made by veterans and families everywhere, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Share your thoughts or your own family's military stories in the comments below. I read every single one. Thank you for watching. Hold on to the stories that truly matter, and until next time, take care.